Okay, now we're official. All right, good morning. This is the meeting of the Community Development Authority, Friday, May 30th. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I need to ask for,
We will not.
okay. Do I need to ask for, I don't need to ask for a motion. No, okay.
Straight to number 2.
Okay. So the first item is to consider the meeting minutes from March 7th, 2025. Any,
I was there. I approve the motion to approve the minutes.
Okay.
Second.
Microphone, please, Joe.
Oh,
I was there. I read the minutes. I motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Move that closer. Put it right in your face.
Yeah.
Will we be speaking? Votes?
Yes, everything.
Okay. Okay, so our only main item on the agenda today is the consideration for the recommendation on the Phase 1 application that was submitted by Spurl Commercial for the public assistance to develop affordable housing at 4450 North Oakland Avenue. And I think we're going to start out by having you, Rebecca, just kind of give us an overview and then maybe have a little presentation by Baker Tilly
Great.
on the analysis.
Just to set some expectations for the meeting today, I wanted to update everyone on where we were in the process. Right now, we are following a process laid out in Policy 40 for public assistance utilizing tax increment financing funds. In this particular application, there is not a new TID district being proposed, but utilization of funds that have been earmarked for purposes of affordable housing in conjunction with the statutes. The Policy 40 is a two-phased application process, and today is the first day of which we're reviewing the Phase 1 application. The CDA is requested to provide a recommendation on the application, and that recommendation would then be forthcoming to the village board. The village board then ultimately has the decision to ask the developer to stop in the process or to proceed with submission of a Phase 2 application to continue review of the development for the particular site. For purposes of today, where there was a lot of information that was included within the packet, a new piece of the process that we have with Policy 40 is a financial review of that proposal by Baker Tilly, who is our financial advisor. So David Erdman and Joshua Davis are here with us today. And they're going to they have about 5 to 9 slides regarding the proposal. So they're going to take about 10 minutes to review that financial component. The CDA will then have discussion amongst their group. And I know that we do have a couple members here from the public. While it was not specifically referenced on the agenda, Chair Kraus will open up the floor to have people approach the microphone, state their name and address. And if you'd like to provide a comment, you're welcome to do so. We just ask that you keep it to under 2 minutes. Following all of that, then the CDA will deliberate on any action they're looking to take today.
Rebecca, point of order. Just kind of really try to unpack, speaking of the microphone,
Yeah.
try to unpack a little bit what we're considering today. If we vote to move this forward, are we endorsing the project as a whole, or are we just saying, and this is just kind of for the record, or are we just saying we want this to move, we want the village board to consider moving this to Phase 2? So is this a recommendation for, hey, we support the project, or a recommendation for, hey, we think it should move forward in the process?
Mhm. I hate to sound boring, but I'm going to read to you the policy. So what Policy 40 states is that the inclusion of the initial analysis, which is today, the CDA will be provided with the results of the review of the project, which you have in your packet. The CDA will provide a recommendation on the application and supporting results to the village board. Included within the recommendation will be a statement of public benefits of the project and how the village will benefit from contributing public support. So as you'll see within your packet, I do have a cover memo that comes on top of these documents and had some possible motions just kind of working off of that language that you can take a look at for purposes of today. Of course, if you did not believe that it does not provide public benefit, and do not believe that the village should provide public support, then that would also be an alternative motion.
And just one more point of order. If we take the first motion in the packet and move to not recommend phase one application to the village board, does it go up to the board anyways, or does it stop
Yes.
here?
Yes, it will always ascend to the village board because ultimately, in conjunction with policy 40, the CDA is only a recommending body.
So if we want more information, we could defer to get more information,
Correct.
right?
Okay. Then, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Baker Tilly, and we'll pull up their presentation.
Good morning, and thanks for having us this morning. I'm Dave Urban. I'm a managing director of Baker Tilly Municipal Advisors, and we've been engaged to serve as municipal advisor to the village for bond and note transactions, but also work relating to this phase one application. Joshua Davis is going to give most of the presentation. I also want to identify that Michaela, Joshua and I are both located in Madison. Michaela is online. She's in Minneapolis, and she's also been heavily involved in this review and analysis. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joshua, and feel free to ask any questions at any time.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Can you all hear me okay?
Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah.
I'm used to speaking in a microphone, so this is a new thing to me.
Welcome.
Just want to reiterate Dave's comments and say thank you to the board and to the village for hosting us today and for allowing us to do this presentation.
Just, can anyone hear him on? We have problems with.
We all good?
Yeah, you-
Michaela, can you let us know if you hear us?
Yep, I
Okay.
can hear you. Good morning.
Okay, sounds good. And we can hear Michaela, so that's good. So the goal is to get through this presentation in about 10 minutes to provide a brief overview of the project and kind of our analysis. The report goes into significantly more detail about our process, our methodology, and our findings. So if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to stop me, but I believe the goal is to get through this and then leave a lot of time for questions. So I'm going to go to the first slide. This is just our purpose and disclosure. So it's kind of outlining what the study is. So the purpose of the but-for analysis is to just evaluate the likelihood or the probability that the project would occur without the requested incentive. We look at this project as proposed by the applicant. So in terms of their capital stack, their cost assumptions, those are the things we work with. And then we evaluate whether these costs and expected returns are within a standard market range. Just in terms of other aspects of this, we are hired by the village. We have no financial interest in the project. One other thing to keep in mind is that the but-for is not a feasibility study. So we're not looking at things like, absorption or looking at other projects that are coming to the market at the same time. We're specifically just evaluating the cost and revenues associated with this particular project. And then also, these are based on estimates and market data, so actual results may vary from forecast. And then next slide. Thank you. You'll hear us reference industry sources. So just briefly, what the main sources we use are CoStar. This is where our real estate data comes from. So when we're talking about rents, vacancy, all of that's coming from CoStar. We also reference the PwC Investor Survey. So this is a survey among commercial real estate investors, just kind of outlining their expected returns. It also has things about associated with cost, vacancy, and financing assumptions. And then in terms of construction costs, we use RS Means, which gives us sub-market and local level construction data. So we can actually see what's the expected per square foot cost of constructing like a shell multifamily building. So next slide. This is just the project overview. It's a 3-story, 19-unit multifamily residential building. 100% of the units will have rents that are affordable to tenants who are earning between 30 and 60% of the Milwaukee County median income. As for the assistance request, this is ultimately going to depend on the applicant's final capital stack as they indicated in their application. The maximum request is 1.7 million in TIF extension funds, which are available for affordable housing developments and are earmarked, as Rebecca said earlier. The alternative request is the applicant indicated that they would be open to a reduction in the upfront TIF incentive if the cost of the land was reduced to a nominal sum, say like $1. So they would request less funds if the land cost was reduced. Next slide. So this is just a study overview of what we do for the but-for. So we evaluate the applicant's estimated project cost. We also evaluate their projected revenues. We consider a hypothetical sale of the asset. That way we're not underestimating the expected return. And then finally, we determine the internal rate of return without the incentive based on those estimated cash flows. And then we compare that internal rate of return to what we see in the broader market using the PwC survey. Next slide. So this is just a breakdown of the applicant's overall development expenses, and our opinion is that they appear reasonable. And if we could actually just jump to the next slide because it builds off this one. This is a breakdown of the major development costs. So you'll see the vertical construction, acquisition cost, soft cost, developer fee, and the financing assumptions. So what you're seeing is the estimated percent of the project, and then these are comparing the applicant's estimates to our benchmark ranges. So the major one being vertical construction, the applicant estimates approximately $183 per square foot. Our benchmark range is about $151 to $191 per square foot. The difference being in the quality of finishes, what type of framing is used. So if you're using concrete, brick, steel, significantly more expensive, which leads to a higher per square foot cost. Based on that range, developers' assumptions appear reasonable. So we have no suggestions or adjustments made to the pro forma. Next slide, please.
Can you go
I know,
pause on that slide for a second?
go back.
I'm just trying to reading across. So soft costs, how is that within benchmark range?
So
Maybe
the
I'm just
soft
missing it.
cost is looking at, if you go back to the slide before, you'll see this breakdown of all these additional costs. So it's like soft cost contingency, other soft costs, financing fees, capital reserves, professional fees and reports. Typically, each one of those we kind of expect to see between like 5 to 10%.
Okay, but 5 to 10 is individual because
Mhm, yeah.
37 point.
Yeah, we should have put 5 to 10 like individually in the but it's 5 to 10% individually for those kind of like other soft costs. Is a pretty
Okay, so
standard
soft
range.
costs aren't 8 times industry standard. They're
Mm-mm,
they're
yeah,
within industry.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's just the like total overall sum percentage. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. So analysis of the operating expenses. So one part of affordable housing is that this is heavily regulated and has a lot of guidelines that are given by HUD. So in terms of kind of what they expect to see in the pro forma, there's a lot of criteria that are already established. And so we reviewed the HUD guidelines and they are in line with what we would expect to see. That's $6,000 annually per unit. And then replacement reserves of about $300. And they have to set these criteria to make sure that the applicant is meeting debt service requirements and other criteria. Oh, go ahead.
Is
Question.
that $300 per unit? I'm guessing.
That is the annual replacement reserve. So it's like the estimated amount of maintenance and things like
Right,
that.
Per
but is it
unit.
per unit?
Yes.
Not the building.
Yeah, per unit. Yeah.
Okay, figured.
Yep. In terms of property estimates, we estimated our own property cost using an income approach. That's typically what you'll kind of see used for affordable housing. We were very close, I think, over a 15-year pro forma. There was about a $20,000 difference, which we would consider to be not material. Their financing assumptions align with current market rates and what we're seeing in the market. And we also cross-check their replacement reserves from the PwC survey. So their annual replacement reserves, we cross-check that amount. So it has HUD as backup, and then it also has the PwC survey. And both of those are within the ranges provided by HUD and the PwC survey. Next slide.
What are included in replacement reserves? Like what's under that umbrella?
Michaela, would you like to answer that question? She's our director and could probably give a succinct answer.
Sure. Good morning. That's typically, it's kind of exactly what it says. It's reserves that they put on hand for any maintenance or capital expenses of the project itself. Just to ensure that they have the funding for any necessary improvements, for the building.
Okay, so maybe more like it's actually a maintenance reserve more so. Replacement makes it seem like you could replace the building with that. You're
Sure.
not.
Yeah.
this-
It's more just, yeah, good clarification.
Yeah. Okay.
It's
Okay.
rainy day funds essentially.
Correct. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
And the next slide, please. So this is just an overview of the expected rents, and what this is attempting to visualize is just the projected rents based on the bedroom size, based on the AMI categories. Sorry, I'm actually kind of feeling very like lightheaded.
No, sit down.
So yeah, if Michaela, if you want to finish out the presentation, that would probably be better. That way I don't
Pass
faint
out.
up here.
Have a seat.
Yeah, sorry, this is
There's a bubbler out there.
yeah.
Conflict of interest.
We're pretty much to the end.
There's a bubbler in the hallway.
Water.
Bubbler.
I guess I'm a homie now, right?
I call it a bubbler as well.
I'm not from here.
Oh.
Funny. So. I
You
can
can
ju-
see the
I-
slides. You can see the
Yeah.
slides, correct, Michaela? Okay.
Yep, sorry. So this is the projected rents, and we'll see it's at the different AMI, area median income levels for the 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units of the project, and you'll see the projected rents at the 30%, 50%, and 60%. And again, those are the rent levels for each of the individual tenants at the various unit counts and income levels.
I have a question. And this might be a question more for Brian, but how are there guidelines as to how many, how can I ask this? So you have a range of what you're shooting for, 30 to 60% of median household income. Are there guidelines to how many tenants can be 30%, 60%, 50%, or is it sort of as long as all the tenants in the building are within that range, you meet the guideline? Does that make sense? Okay. Is that basically it? Is that what?
Oh, use the microphone.
Yes.
To qualify for the low-income housing tax credits, the building total can't be more than 60%.
Okay. So, yeah. So everyone could be potentially 35% or 55% or within, as long as it's all totally within that range.
You have to be within that range.
Yeah. Okay.
yes.
That's fine. Makes sense. Okay.
I have a question. So somewhere in here, I remember seeing something about choices for a deep subsidy, shallow subsidy, or no subsidy. What do
Yeah.
what is Mr. Sproul's proposal in terms of that kind of a subsidy? Did I miss that somewhere?
Yeah, and I can clarify that that reference. So when we're looking at a project, and typically the deeper subsidy is more the 30% units versus a shallow subsidy would be, and this is all subject to market and different rent and income levels based on location. But the deeper subsidies are those 30% units where you'll see the bigger, if you look at this slide, you'll see the difference in the projected rents between the 30% units and the 60% units, for example. So having rents all the way down to tenants at 30% AMI requires a greater level of subsidy and public and funding sources to make the project financially viable. So this project being at the 30%, the 50%, 60%, it's more, I wouldn't call it deep subsidy because you do have 50 and 60% units, but it's definitely on the greater required subsidy level than like a shallow subsidy would be more if you're trying to meet like 60 or 80% AMI levels, for example, and more kind of workforce demographics. So and I think the other thing I would add in the next slide kind of shows what the difference between the rent levels here. And I think the balance of, one, making sure that the overall unit mix and the income levels meet the requirements of the financing, the tax credits. And then 2, the overall financial viability of the project and what the generated rents will be to support the operating expenses and capital investment of the project. So hopefully that addresses your question.
So could we have a 60% rate go with the shallow subsidy across all units? And then how would we know what their profit margin looks like?
So I think that's so in that question, if we're looking at this slide here, I think the other side of the project is you've got the financial viability and need for assistance, and the other is hitting a certain market level and trying to provide those more affordable units. So I think in your question, if all the units are at 60% AMI, there's no 30 or 50%, the assumption that there would be more revenues generated by the project would be correct. However, there might be there's also but it might not hit the market need of what the affordable units would be. And there's also the competitiveness of the tax credits themselves that when we're looking at what that unit mix count is. So I guess where I'm going is there's a bit of a balance between, the financial difference between the unit mix of the 30, 50, and 60% AMI levels, and then the overall kind of market need of the project and what the residents that are being supported by the development are.
Can
I have just one follow-up. So if we change these numbers to all 60% AMI, do we jeopardize the position of the developer in the marketplace for the low income housing tax credits? Or we're less likely to get it?
Brian.
Why don't you
Speaking
step up? Also, Brian, can I interject? Brian, don't you have a target in mind? These are all variables we're not contemplating at this point, I believe. You have this all factored in,
Yeah.
correct?
So if you look in your packet under, there's a section in there called the WIDA scoring system and time limited opportunity for Shorewood. And I kind of laid it out in that part of it, but
You know what
basically
page we're on?
it's okay.
20 something, it's like 26, 27.
So
It's somewhere.
So you hit the nail on the head. There is a scoring metric, and it's a competitive process with the state of Wisconsin to win 9% tax credits or 4% tax credits. In this case, the rents that we have shown in the mix of units go directly to maximizing our ability to win those credits. And that's, I think I saw Trustee Warren? You have that in front of you too, I think I saw, yeah. And so it's a rather complex metric of things that have to be met, but this project, we believe that we set up to win. And I've won 2 tax credit deals already, and only pursue the ones that I can win.
So you think the 160 out of 179 that you said that's going to win it? You're
Well,
giving yourself-
there's no guarantee, but what I can tell you is that Shorewood is in a very good place to win it under the current 2025 and 2026 QAP, because you score very, very well in what's called area of economic opportunity. That's the rest of these. Everybody else will score probably the same because they also know how to, which percentage goes where. But the things that others don't control is this points that you score within this important first area of economic opportunity, and where there's a real need for affordable housing.
So this kind of goes back to my original question, and maybe this is part of the answer,
Sure.
is in reality, once the building is built, are certain units designated for certain AMI levels, or is it more just theoretically up front? This is kind of what it's talked about. I guess I'm trying to understand, how
The purpose of the credits is to follow this metric. So if we agree to this, that those are the parameters of the building.
Right. But there's no parameter saying 20% of the units have to be occupied by a person at 30% with a family at 30% AMI, or is that part of the process?
That is the process.
Okay. All right. So we just haven't seen that breakout of the 19 units. Maybe that's part of the presentation.
No, that
That
actually
coming
is, that is in here. The break.
In yours,
How
I'm
they
saying
have
in
it broken down is
the
exactly
Baker
how. it is.
Tilly presentation where the public is about to see. Do we get into that? Is that?
Yes.
Not this?
Oh, got it. Okay. Okay.
This.
Missed it. Okay. Yep. You're right. That makes sense now.
Does that answer?
Yeah.
Can I go ask you about, so in the Whitefish Bay project that you worked on, and maybe you'll talk about this. for
Yes.
The Baker Tilly, that you won, like, will you talk about that later?
Can,
or-
sure.
I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself, but, and maybe someone in the public will ask that as well, but sort of how you won that project, and is that sort of the same way that you plan to work, I don't know if you want to talk about that now or later.
I can, as long as you addressed it, I can quickly address that. Is that project, we did not go for the competitive tax credits. We went for non-competitive. We won 4% non-competitive. And the reason we could do that is because Milwaukee County put in a significant investment in that project. And so those rents are between 50 and 60%. They don't have any 30% rents.
So just kind of for the record, and so we're clear. So
Sure.
if you win the tax credit, you are locked into this spreadsheet, this structure.
Yes.
And if you move outside of the structure, you lose the tax credit.
Yes, there's an annual compliance. And so when the tax credit investor puts in cash equity, they actually have the developer guarantee. And so in this project, if we have however many tax credits we have, I think we have 750,000, I think is what I have to relook at that. But yes, if there's an annual compliance period that you have to comply, or otherwise you don't get the tax credits, and the investor would have to pay, and therefore so would the developer.
And so if there's no, if you don't win the tax credit, then on the flip side, can you move this around however you want?
If there's no tax credits,
Yes.
the project's not feasible.
Okay. So the project doesn't go forward unless there's a tax credit.
That's correct. And I think their Baker Tilly pretty much concluded that.
Okay. Let's continue to get through the presentation
Yeah.
now, and then we'll pull you back in if we need more clarification.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next slide.
Yeah, we can go to the next slide. Yeah, Michaela, I'm back. So I can take over from here.
You can
And
pull the
sorry
micro-
about that.
Pull the microphone towards you there. all the
Okay.
way. Yeah. There you
I think my necktie was a little too tight this morning.
go. I feel like I don't want to wear a necktie either.
Like Brian said, so what you're seeing on the left is a visualization of the estimated rate of return. So with incentive, you're seeing two other ranges here. The upper boundary that's from the PwC, which is about 10.75% for investors in multifamily developments. The lower boundary for the current market is about 6.8%. And then based on estimates of our cash flows, we get about 8% with incentive. And you'll see that without the incentive, the project's not feasible. Here it's graphed at 0%, but that's because it's essentially a negative rate of return. And the way IRR works is you can't have a negative discount rate, so it's undefined. So it's just graphed at 0. But significant variables that are impacting this are the thin marginal revenues associated with affordable housing projects, current elevated cost of capital, interest rates are higher, which makes the project more difficult. And then also this project, there's only 19 units, so density is also a factor. If you had more density, you'd have more revenues and would expect more cash flows. Next slide. We were also asked to review how the project aligns with the village's policy 40. So you'll see on the right is just a breakdown of the major criteria in terms of the equity, the payback period, TIF cap, property assembly, IRR. Those are kind of the major requirements. Really what we see is that the project is broadly aligned with the criteria that are outlined here. One thing I do want to note that if you look at the equity requirement, it says 0% as proposed. But that's kind of something that's specific to these tax credit deals because the equity is being provided by the tax credit investors. So if you consider the equity that is coming from the tax credit investors, it's actually 58% equity that's being provided. So that would align with the village's policy. The only other one that's a concern is the payback period. So village outlines, approximately 20 years to be paid back for the investment. Based on our estimates of the property taxes, we estimate that all jurisdictions to collect approximately $500,000 over 20 years. And that's based on using the income approach, which is typically used for affordable housing projects. But that's just kind of our estimate. So if you, we'd have to go into more detail to get a better number than that. But are there any questions on this?
Yeah, I don't, so tell me again, why does it not follow compliance determination payback period? Is it because it's 50?
Yeah, so so the developer's capital stack is requesting $750,000 in TIF funds. And just want to highlight the maximum request is like 1.7, but the applicant only expects to need about 750,000 based on receiving other funds. So our understanding of the policy is that over 20 years, the village would expect to receive back that $750,000 in TIF funds. Based on our estimates, the 20-year payback period is approximately $500,000 for all taxing jurisdictions. So to be a yes in that compliance determination, it would be you would have to see a number that would be above $750,000 according to our understanding. These are also one other note is that these are based on pretty modest property tax assumptions. So we basically took the 2024 mill rates and then applied like a 3% growth assumption. So we try to be conservative when estimating property taxes. So there's a lot of assumptions at play when you're estimating those future revenues.
So a higher tax rate would, the payback period be get more money
Yep.
soon.
Yeah. So if you were to even just make small adjustments like, 5% annually, or if the value of the appraisal comes in higher, you would collect those taxes back much faster.
And so what would infrastructure cost look? Like, there's no water, there's no sewer, there's electrical there. There's probably some storm sewer. What would infrastructure costs be? Who would pay?
So that'd probably be a good
Brian,
question for
yeah,
Brian
why
to
don't you go
answer.
ahead and, you can address that.
The project would pay for the infrastructure costs to hook the sewer, water, and storm to the municipal system. The municipality would supply the mains, which are already there.
So when it always says the project does not include any infrastructure costs, you're just telling me that you, the applicant, will pay. So,
The total development cost is in that budget.
okay, so this is not accurate.
No, that's very accurate.
The project does not include any infrastructure costs. You're paying them, they're just not in here. So I don't need to know.
Well, I'm not sure what are you reading from.
First bullet,
Well, I'll let Baker Tilly explain what they mean by infrastructure costs, but what I can tell you is that in our numbers, we have budgeted for hook up the water, sewer, and storm.
Yeah, my guess is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that that's referring to additional infrastructure costs outside of the property. So if this was
We need to build a
this was a
road.
cornfield a mile away and we had to build a road and we had to take sewer and we had to take water and we had to take gas out there to get to the property. But since it's all right in
Yeah.
the road,
And
we
maybe
don't need to do that.
maybe the references to TIF, I'll let them explain, but
That's correct.
yeah.
So it would be those like major infrastructure projects that would be associated with that additional
So
development.
typically TIF, we're not applying for TIF really. This is just using the money from a TIF extension, which is where some of the confusion comes in. But on a normal TIF structure, the tax incremental financing would pay for public improvements.
Yeah, so if
Right.
we had to widen the road, for example, or
Yes.
we had to
Build the
increase
road.
the size of the sewer main in order to handle the development or something like that. That would be what TIF funds would be used for.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we don't have any of those in this case because you're not, your development does not require any enhancement of existing facilities.
Well, not that I'm aware of. We still have
Yeah.
would go through a review with the engineering department.
But very unlikely for adding
yeah.
19 units to a major
Yes,
thoroughfare. Yeah.
that is true.
And Brian, that IRR 8.25, that's your internal number as well? That's where that comes from?
Well, we don't really look at our projects like that because there's
That's what
no,
they derive from your numbers?
there's
then?
no cash flow. I think what they're saying here is any market.
That's based on the cash flows we get from looking at his pro forma. So what we do for the purpose of the but-for is we take the pro forma that's provided to us, we review the revenue and cost assumptions, and then we estimate the internal rate of return, which we then compare to the PwC survey. So
So to the extent of the tax credit investor that they get their money back through the tax credits and the depreciation of the property, they can realize something close to a market rate return.
Yep, that would be getting into the nuance, and the report
Okay.
does
Yeah,
get
it
into
is.
those deeper details of
Okay.
like how that return is estimated.
Got it.
But
But typically, yes, you would calculate the equity that goes in and the cash flow over time. And that's how you get your internal rate of return. But in this case, there is no cash flow. So it's more of a function of how the investor gets their return on equity through the tax credits and depreciation.
Got it.
And that's the benefit that cash brings to the community, basically as effectively free equity, but it's not free. There's a price to it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
I think we can, yeah, I think that's it. So, yep, that's the end of the presentation.
Okay. Great. Thank you very
Well
much.
done.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So I guess now we should, we've had a little bit of a discussion. Why don't we open it up for discussion here amongst ourselves, members of the CDA, and feel free to just.
So one of the things that was mentioned was the kind of lower density of this unit. Do we have a comparison to similar sized lots on like main stretches like Oakland or Capitol for like the number of units that are kind of on similar sized lots? Do we have any information about that?
Art, you might know a little bit.
I mean, the lot is not that dissimilar to the two recent redevelopments from Wimmer Communities and Three Leaf. Both of those had 39 and 43 units, so roughly double. They occupied the entire lot, whereas this development leaves the remainder of the lot in the back open for surface parking, so that, impacts the number of units that are being built there. So yeah, other lots of similar size in the village have been redeveloped with larger number of units.
So something more dense could be built,
Per zoning, yes.
but in order to have one-to-one parking, you'd have to go underground. Or,
Correct,
that
or
was-
build
or-
above it.
And that
or
was
build.
cost prohibitive, as I recall, correct?
Probably depends. How many units?
Yeah.
Um,
Microphone.
Mhm.
Underground parking would add a significant amount of cost and for this particular design would not be feasible because we'd also have to add an elevator to the building, which effectively then makes it a 4-stop elevator. And so if you combine the cost of the parking and the additional improvements that would have to be made to the building, including common area corridors and elevators, it would significantly increase the cost of the project and
I
make it
recall
not
this, and that,
feasible.
and in comparison to the other ones, those are luxury, and those, they can afford those costs, whereas this project is not, correct?
It's hard to answer that. I mean, the other projects meaning what? The signature, I think, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're definitely higher density projects and they also are charging market rate rent.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah. So
so-
in your design, if I remember reading, a lot of the point of it was to keep it affordable to build, which therefore keeps it affordable to rent and meet the criteria for winning tax credits. And it's kind of a whole big picture that all works together to try and get this done.
Yes. So any more that is less that you would need either additional tax credits in that case. Kind of get into the weeds on this, but there's this concept in the tax credit world called eligible basis. And land is not an eligible basis as an example. So we don't get the benefit of any tax credits for the land costs. If you increase the total project cost, you can get additional tax credits. But in this case, if you added $1 million, the most amount of tax credits you could get on that is like maybe the 58%. So you'd have to come up with the additional gap to fill, which is where your TIF money is coming from. You're filling the gap between what the project costs and what the equity investors are willing to put in. And that's a pretty significant gap. And at present, we're able to fill that gap with the project that we have designed. And not only can we fill it, but based on the conversation that we had in September with the village board, the combined village board and CDA, is that you didn't want to spend the full $2 million to TIF on one project. And so that is what kind of put us back to the drawing board to figure out how do we put together a project that meets the goals of the community from an income standpoint and also meets the goals of the community as to how much they're willing to invest in it. And so that's how we arrived at this plan.
So just to be clear, we're essentially subsidizing parking spots rather than people's homes because we've prioritized parking over housing.
No,
No,
in this
like
case,
if you didn't have to put in parking spots, you wouldn't have more units.
in this case, there's a under the zoning, there's a parking ratio requirement.
Well, I think that's what he's asking. If the village's parking ratio was 0, could you provide more units? Is that accurate, Mitch?
Basically, yeah.
I guess hypothetically, yes, but likely the tax credit investors wouldn't be interested.
So is there, and if somebody was disabled without an elevator, could you get to first floor units in the rear of the building?
Yeah, all the first floor is fully accessible
Okay, because it looks like from the rear of the building.
from the rear of the building,
Okay.
yes.
And can you talk about the front facade a little bit? Like what are those materials? Are those brick or with metal?
That's a rendering.
Okay.
I know there's still a process here for any approvals. We use that as an example. The shell of the building, the skin of the building can be a number of different materials. In Whitefish Bay, I used about 25% of the facade is brick and the rest is glass. And we're using 3 different products: a hardy product, a LP product, and a brick product.
Okay. I think in between, between those two buildings are sort of older, more historic apartment buildings. And I think that is a big part of the conversation in Shorewood, is the dialogue of the charm. And so I know that a lot of residents want to make sure that the building feels like it fits into the community. And so, and myself included, feel like that is part of it. And so if there's some way that we can make sure that this feels like there's some, composition with the building materials, that it feels like it belongs here, that is important to, the continuity within that block. To me, that is important. So
This would have to be approved by design review, would it
it
not?
would, yes.
So that's their purview, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But well.
Yeah, we absolutely appreciate that and would respect that. And in part, kind of driving the 3-story walk-up design. There's a ton of them in Shorewood and Milwaukee in general.
Yeah, yep, okay.
did
Yep.
seem like though there was quite a price range there in that item. I can't recall the page exactly, but between the finishes for the exterior. And I'm wondering how soon would we know based upon, if when we're looking at the subsidy, because the cost difference was significant range that you gave with the different exteriors.
Huh. Yeah.
That was our range based
Oh.
on the data that was provided by RS Means. So what we were seeing when we cross-checked the developer's cost assumptions, since it is a preliminary design, we like to just do a sensitivity. And what we were seeing was like, if you were to use the absolute cheapest materials possible, it would be approximately $150 per square foot. But if you were to do like brick, steel, things like that, it's closer to that 190 range. So that's
So
the
did you
purpose
choose a
of that
median? I
range.
can't remember.
Yeah, the median is about 170 if
And
you
that's-
just do the
and that's
median
what you
between
use
those.
for the,
We kind of provide a sensitivity in terms of the project cost. When we're estimating the cash flows, we use what the developer provided. Just given that they were within that range, we didn't see a strong reason to adjust it at this
Okay.
point in time. But that's an easy adjustment to make to look at the internal rate of return. If we were to have an updated construction budget, we can easily plug that back in and change that.
so the subsidy, obviously, if we decide to give a subsidy, obviously, we would hope to get finishes that match the community aesthetic for whatever,
It's been my experience with these developments that the community is a partner in this. It's not developer versus municipality. It's we, and it works well that way.
Right. And in your estimates, you were kind of baking some of that into your estimates for the costs of the material.
Yeah, I mean, it's near and dear to me since I'm going to start construction on my project in Whitefish Bay in about a week. I know the prices very, very well. And so, so yes, this building is, assumes, similar finishes to that one for now. Brick color can be different. You can choose. I mean, brick is more expensive than other products out there right now, but certainly willing to explore that with
Yeah,
you.
but your estimates weren't like the cheapest possible materials, and then all of a sudden we're going to get a few months into this, and then
This does
realize-
not assume the cheapest
okay,
materials.
yeah.
So it,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah.
Okay. Any other comments, Kathy?
I just want to be clear that I understand the capital stack and what you're putting into this, what you and your investors are putting in. So it looks like the developer fee is $330,000. Does that go straight to Spurl?
Well, let me get on the same page as you.
Okay. I think it was on page 87 of the packet.
Yeah.
I just, for transparency about where the money's going and who's making money and
Yeah, absolutely.
And by the way, I think the project looks good. It's something I might be able to support. I think it fits in with the community. I appreciate your efforts to do all of this. I just, there's some things that I have some.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. By the way, I appreciate the questions. I think it's been a thoughtful process so far, and they're all very good questions. So, and the thing about affordable housing is that there is no place to hide. I mean, you've seen, you've probably seen other development projects where, you would never see this level of detail from any other development project. I mean, we are standing out here with no clothes on, and I've basically put my business model and all these costs in front of the entire public, including on Facebook recently. And so there's nothing to hide. But in this case, you are correct. What's tricky about the development fee is that it's a moving target, and that is that there is a development fee that can be earned. There's specific language in WIDA that tells you how much money you can earn. And what they use that fee for is to pay us, but they oftentimes also use it to finance the project. So if the project needs more equity for it to be feasible, they turn to us basically for free money. And then we get that money in the future if the project, any project cash flow would then come back to the developer. So ultimately, yes, the $330,000 that you see comes to us. It just may not come right away.
So what's your ideal scenario? When would you anticipate it'd be a one-time cash payment?
Well, it's only paid if there's usually about 20% is paid at closing of the loans. And then the rest of it is paid upon completion, and stabilization is really when you get the final payout.
And that's typically maybe a year after.
It's
Tenants start
about
moving
18
in.
months after, so there's a 12-month construction period and then there's a stabilization period, although I think this will lease up very quickly, but
And stabilization, just so people understand, that's filling the building with tenants to a certain point, either 100%, 80%. What's stabilization defined as?
95%.
95. Okay.
So it's
Yes.
by be 2029.
Yeah. And so in addition to that, just so everybody knows, because there's always a risk adjusted return on all of this. This fee is extraordinarily low relative to most tax.
I'm trying to figure out why you're doing this. You're not really making that much money.
Because ultimately I'm going to own a building in Shorewood, and I'm going to put a building in Shorewood, which has been my community for 30 years. I'm going to make it affordable to people who normally wouldn't be able to get into Shorewood.
But you don't live here, right?
I don't, but
I understand.
sent my kids here, lived here for 25 years.
Yeah, knowledge. Okay.
These are my friends.
So I'm just looking at the developers. So what you have put in actually equity wise, I mean, when I'm looking at the packet here, the development team is the category where it looks like you're scored pretty low. Primary developer, gave yourself 2 points for emerging developers, 0 for WIDA evaluation of capacity, nonprofit developers, 0. Co-developers, you gave yourself 0s. Second co-developer, all 0s. So what's your skin in the game here to make sure this? It doesn't look to me like, I mean, you're getting loans and low-income tax credits. Financially, what are you and your investor putting in?
Well, we put in all of the pre-development costs and take on all the risk and guarantee the tax credit equity and any of the loans. And so our skin is quite big. In fact, even when you win the tax credits, you have to pay a very large sum of money to WIDA to what calls a reservation fee. And so these developments, even at this point, by the time we design a building and go through the process, I mean, we'll have 6 figures into it and could never get a nickel back. So there's a lot of skin. Plus, they're very, very time consuming. So I can only do, a
I was
couple
going
of
to point
these.
that out. You've been working at this for a long time.
Right.
Yeah, well, all the projects, they just take time. And so the investment that you make is both cash and sweat along the way. And then and you're ultimately, or I'm ultimately responsible for delivering the building. You have to guarantee it.
One concern I have is that there's no appraisal on the property. And it seems to me there's the opportunity here that we could give them the land for $1, or we could give them to it at a value of 330 something. In due diligence for the village, it would seem to me if there's going to be a gift given, the residents and the taxpayers should know what its appraised value is. So I see that as something that I would need to know before this goes forward. I would need to know what the land is appraised at.
Okay. Wesley?
Question, in the proposal, I note that the TIF extension, it's either 750,000, speaking to the mic, 750,000 or 1.7 million, depending on if FHLB funds are approved or not.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if any of what's going on the federal level with the Trump administration, is that impacting the chances that FHLB funds are going to be approved? Have there been cuts to that?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, they're funded by member banks. So that's the Federal Home Loan Bank is member banks that fund it. So not that I'm aware of, not yet.
Okay. Yeah, I'm also worried about the administration of it too.
Yeah, no, it can, I mean, yes, it all works together. We're all in this together.
I bet you're not aware of any changes at this point.
No.
that would-
Okay. Well, we're at about an hour, unless there's any other major comment, Kathy.
Thank you. So my first choice here was, and I think for many of us, was to get people into, when we first had this money set aside, the $2 million in 2021. Second choice was to try to get them in to find affordable housing in a building like the Light Horse, where there's a mixture and it just is more inclusive. I think 20% of those units are affordable housing, and it's just a much more inclusive approach than this. And nobody's biting on that. The Atwater, the Signature developers don't want to do it. I'm really interested in supporting this once we get some more numbers, but I do have to say, I'm also committed to saving 25% of this TID money for helping to fund the streetlights. It's legal and we face astonishing infrastructure costs. And so I'm committed to trying to make sure that $500,000 still goes for the streetlights, leaving 1.5 million. And I'd like to see an appraisal.
Okay. Any other comments? And then maybe we can open it up to if there's any public comments.
I did have one more question. The estimate in the Baker Tilly was a 3% increase in tax, and I'm pretty sure we're going to overshoot that by a pretty dramatic amount. How does that affect the long-term affordability of these units? Like, I imagine having to pay more in property taxes is going to make it less affordable for you. And so, like, how does that trickle down into the affordability of the units?
Property taxes are set by the state of Wisconsin Department of Revenue. They tell there's a specific formula that municipalities have to follow on the basis of
Your development, you're talking
on affordable housing developments, they
Okay.
can only charge taxes on what the net operating income of the building produces.
Oh, okay.
No effect.
It's not the same rate as, say, a person's home or the Fountain Blue.
Well, it is,
or-
but it has, the valuation is based on the net operating income of the building. So they're not looking at market rate comparables. They're looking at what the investment value of the building is.
So is that going to be less or more than market?
Less because it's affordable housing. I think that was that slide earlier that
Okay.
said we wouldn't get as much if we did market rate housing. It is necessarily less because we're charging less in rent, so the building is worth less.
Yeah.
It's all the same equation.
And I think what you're saying, because as a property owner, I'm dealing with this. So because your numbers are, as you say, out in the open to everyone, they know exactly what you're making. Unlike any other privately owned apartment building in this village or in this county, really, the assessors don't really know unless someone were to just provide them their books, which no one does, to be able to figure out what the actual value is. So in this case, the value is very accurate based on market. So moving forward, the taxes will be reflected on a very accurate calculation of the net operating income, which ultimately determines the value of any real estate asset, is how much money it makes. So that makes sense. So, okay. All right. Anything else? Great. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to make a comment, as Rebecca said, we'd welcome that now. And again, just try to keep it fairly short, around 2 minutes would be great. We don't have too many people here. Just come up, state your name, your address, and your comment, right, Bart? Is that the process?
Yeah, and if you're online, you can raise your hand and I can
Oh, yes.
pick you
we
out as
forgot
well.
Online people. Anyone in the audience personally?
Go ahead.
Yeah, come on up.
I think my name's Christine Sueda. I live at 4114 North Lake Drive. And I think Kathy's point is that the questionnaire survey was about affordable housing with the goal of housing. The community has 54% rentals, which is significantly higher than Whitefish Bay 19 or other areas. I don't believe we need more rentals. We were tasked to get more housing. That's what the survey was asking, and we're going, I think, in a wrong direction. Secondly, I think the payback period in the policy says it should be around 10 years. And in the analysis, if I understood correctly, it wasn't 1.7 million being analyzed for a 20-year payback period. It was 750,000. That means it would be excessively long, probably 50 years, to have this payback. How long are the tax credits? 1 year, 5 years, 10 years? It's not clear. That's the period where they have to restrict and have the rental periods as demonstrated in the slides. So if it's a 1 year, 5 year credit, after that, it can be changed. I think that's also a concern because it will not achieve the goal of what's intended here. Infrastructure is a big concern to me. Right now, Lake Drive is under construction, water, sewer, things are being replaced because lead pipes have to be replaced according to the EPA within 10 years. How is the Village of Shorewood going to help our community with all these costs? This TIF money should be used to maintain some of and help some of our existing businesses and communities, buildings that are going to undergo significant costs. And the facilities or infrastructure needed for this development, we have to hook it up. So we're going to have to replace the water main if we don't get money from the state or other places. This TIF money should be used wisely, this 1.7 million or 2 million. And I'm not in favor of it being used for any of these rentals because we have more than enough rentals. And the survey that was done to the people, and we're representing the people of the community, was asking about affordable housing, not affordable rentals. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience? Yes, come on up.
My name is Dino Wagner. I'm at 1606 Beverly. We're talking specifics. I like some generalities. What are we doing and why? Is this the highest and best use of a buildable lot? So for those of us who haven't been involved in this from the beginning, who don't understand the references you're making, please elaborate.
I would, and to her point too, I think it's important to remember that this was a vote to take these funds specifically to extend the TIF for 1 year to be used exclusively for affordable housing, and that is what the village voted for. And so this, to the extent the money could be used for something else, only 25% of it could be used for your lead laterals, et cetera. And I believe we have sufficiently considered that when we've been mulling this over. This is not money that's being taken from the general fund to spend there. We put out a request for proposals from every developer in the state. Very few came through. All the other ones were mostly problematic and were voted down. Brian Sproles is the only one that remains. As far as the tax revenues from the existing site, it's a parking lot. It doesn't provide much to the village. It would provide more as developed. And at this point, the presumption is that, well, not the presumption, we have the money has been allocated for this purpose. So we're just finding the best way to implement it at this point. And the whether you'd agree with affordable housing or not, that was the vote that was had. That was the democratic process.
Mhm.
Well, and I would say, we did look at, for the past 4 years, several different options for affordable housing. We took this $2 million and we've looked at every different option for affordable housing, some of which we did look at, and I would agree, affordable housing options. And when we came to the housing options, we found that those actual housing options would take those actual houses off the tax roll in perpetuity, and realize that that may be not the best option for the village. And so then kind of looked at some other options. I do think that we do need to look at some options for infrastructure, that we can use some of this money for the village, because we do have some incredibly expensive infrastructure costs, like the streetlights that are coming down the road. And that is sort of a new understanding that that's come up, that we can use some of this money for that, which was not discussed. I think when we voted on this, that we could use any of that TIF money for any infrastructure costs. So, and I voted for affordable housing in 2021. But I think, I think we can do both. I think we can help the affordable housing crisis in Milwaukee and help our community with both. I think that we may not, based on Spurl's proposal, we may not need all $1.7 million for this building, and we may be able to have some money for the infrastructure needs for our community, which would be my ideal.
Yeah, and just to chime in and not to belabor the point, because I think these points are very well made. I was part of the vote, I think it was 4 years ago, to set aside these TIF funds for affordable housing. And it's been a very deliberative process. I've served on the CDA the entire time, and we've gone through a lot of options. And I at this point am supportive of moving this one forward. I think it's comprehensive. I think Kathy, Trustee Stokebrand points out some questions that we will want answered on the village board level, but this is certainly a comprehensive proposal. It creates a lot of units, a lot of affordable housing units. It's comprehensive. So I think that this is something that we should move forward. I'm excited that we have a proposal that we can work with, that's moving us in the direction, because those funds have been there for a while now. And I think that we've been expected to deliver results, and I think that this gives us an opportunity to do so.
Another question or comment?
I don't think it's necessary to use the funds for affordable housing if we don't find a project we want to do. And well, why do we want to, why would we need to proceed? There is a possibility to say, let's go back, rethink this, and use it for infrastructure.
Well, it's possible that the village may not move forward, but our job here today, just so everyone knows what we're doing, we are just recommending to the village board to move forward with the process. The board will do the ultimate decision on this. So
That vote
definitely
was already had about whether or not to proceed with affordable housing.
yes. So
or
that was
whatever.
right. So
That
the
was
history
when-
of this
That's
is
a normative economic discussion about how funds ought to be
there's a
spent. This is-
significant amount of
that was
time that
already
was
done.
done.
And
with
just,
that.
just to clarify, it's my understanding, I'm not the village attorney, but it's my understanding that 75% of those funds must be used for affordable housing. As part of that vote, legally, we must use them for affordable housing. 25% can be used for other village costs, but 75% are tied to affordable housing by operation of law, as I understand it.
Well, we have 54% rentals, and I think when the survey came out and the questions, it was, again, people wanted affordable housing, not rentals.
Well, you keep saying housing. Housing does include
Houses.
rentals.
Well,
We
it
did a-
wasn't
we did a-
really
we did
in the
this
question
We did an
years.
economic analysis and providing subsidies to purchase homes in a community as expensive as Shorewood was not feasible.
Right. And when you do that, and when you buy a house, that means that house is taken off the tax roll. So those houses are no longer paying property taxes.
And they don't pay for lead
Right,
laterals
they don't
and the
pay-
things
they
you're
do not
bringing
pay-
up.
And the biggest expense in Shorewood is our property taxes.
Yeah.
And so it is not affordable for someone to live in Shorewood, it's just not, it's not feasible. And as much as, I mean, that was my dream, was that we could have somebody build equity and be able to have someone live in Shorewood and have a family own a home in Shorewood. And we went through, I mean, it was a year plus process of us exploring that option. And I mean, it's unfortunately not possible.
And I would say, you know, again, we're getting a little long here, but I would definitely recommend for you to go back and possibly look at old meeting minutes and the reports and
Okay.
and the survey. Clearly, you've done some of your own homework, and that's great. But this decision on whether or not to move forward with affordable housing, this type of affordable housing, has been a very long and well-researched decision. So your comments are great and we hear them, but I think a lot of your questions can be answered if you go back and look at the history of how we got here.
Okay, I'd like to also state that the parking revenue for that lot exceeds the $20,000 a year, $20,351, which was his number for the tax revenue. So we will be losing tax revenue overall because the parking permits bring in more than this. And this 20,000 is what was allotted to the payback period. So the numbers don't work, is what I'm saying. And people who can afford to live here are living here. And I think that this is, again, not something I think the village has to subsidize. And I know maybe this was decided in 2021, but now the EPA has ruled that lead pipes, other things, and other infrastructure costs are mandated. So I think what I'm trying to say is I think the village should revisit this decision because of changes over this 4-year period.
Okay, well, we understand, we hear you, but that
Okay.
is beyond the scope of what we're doing here today.
Okay.
So I would bring those concerns to the board
Okay.
when and if this gets up there. So
Okay, thank you.
and appreciate that. Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from online?
No one has raised their hand
participants?
online, so I'm not seeing any.
Okay. If there's no other discussion, I think what I'd like to do is ask for a motion at this time. And there is a suggested motion that was put in by staff on the overview. If anyone would like to use that or come up with your own.
Hold on.
Leslie, you look like you want to do something.
Flipping through all this paper and I can't seem to find what I'm looking for.
I move to recommend the phase 1 application to the village board but for the use of TID funds for affordable housing, the development would not be would not be created, and the following public benefits would be provided.
Second.
Okay.
Are we going to include the language that says what benefits would be provided?
Well, or
That was my assumption, presuming affordable housing would be that public benefit.
Sure.
right, yeah.
Yep.
So I think in this case,
I mean, yeah,
what
do
we're
we just
doing
need to
is
say
just
affordable
providing
housing?
affordable housing.
Mhm.
Um,
So
and that is the
would
public
be-
benefit.
Sure. Affordable housing.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Is everyone clear on that? And did I have a second?
Second.
Second. All right. Maybe we should, all in favor?
Is there
Aye.
any discussion?
Yeah, wait.
Oh.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
more discussion? Do we need more discussion?
Well,
I feel like we don't.
I would like to
We've had a
know,
lot.
if we approve this, are we approving any numbers? What are,
We're approving what's been presented in the phase 1 application.
You're recommending further consideration to the board, and then the board would be recommending whether or not the developer should proceed with a phase 2 application. So it's a 2-phase process. You're recommending that what you've seen as of today's presentation is worth consideration of the village board. So it's a recommendation to the village board.
so if I'd like to see what an appraisal, how that changes the numbers, is that something that we could ask for at the village board level, or would it be best to have that?
I mean, yeah, I've definitely made a note of the comment, but at the village board, if you wanted to condition an approval based on seeing that or something, I would leave that up to the village board to discuss. It would need more than, one vote, obviously, but I have made mention that that's a desire, of yours. And if at the board, other people have the same thing, and that's, because you mentioned earlier, we could defer it for more information. If that's something the village board wanted to see, that's something the village board definitely could consider.
Just,
Yeah.
I have a thought about that. Sort of feel like there is no true appraised value available for that lot because it either is a parking lot or it's this project. It doesn't get sold by the village to
We don't know
market.
that.
And is there a scenario under which that gets sold to a developer to develop high income housing?
I mean, the village sold the land where east side condominiums are. The village
Okay.
sold the land on Edgewood where the hospital used to be. The village has sold land for private development.
Fair enough.
I think if
Well,
we're gonna,
that's true, but remember how we got here? That might have been a discussion for then.
right.
I
I'm
mean, I
just
get what
saying,
you're saying.
village finances have changed a lot in
So,
4 years.
Yeah, so I mean, my suggestion here is that your request is reasonable, but I don't see that as being a reason to hold up
Understood.
moving this to the next phase. You have another kick at the cat,
I
you
do.
know,
I have another-
and a third.
Right.
So
I would like to.
we need to, I think we owe, Ms. Pearl, timing wise, we need to move this forward so he can get an answer.
Sure.
So I would not recommend that we hold this back anymore at this level.
How time sensitive is this for the 2025? What are your deadlines? Did I miss that?
Yeah, we discussed that, but.
Yep.
So WIDA has a two-phased process now for tax credit applications, and the conceptual applications are due in December. And so all entitlements have to be done by then. The land has to be
Did you say
under
entitlements?
entitlements. So anything that would permit or not permit us to do this development would have to be taken care of before we make that application, including due diligence on the site, environmental work, things of that nature. That WIDA, when they issue tax credits, they want to be certain that your project can move forward. And so everything that you put in your application your chances of winning are taking all the uncertainty out of the deal. So they want you to have land control. They want you to have your due diligence done. And as for the conceptual application in December, if you win the conceptual application, those announcements come out in January, and then you move forward to the full application, which announcements come out in May. So you'll know next May whether or not you won. But leading up to that, there's a lot of work to do, and it sounds like a lot of additional meetings to get us to that point.
Right.
And so the time is really of the essence.
Would a lesser local municipality subsidy jeopardize your possibility of winning the LIHTC?
No, the stack has to work. So you're just filling the gap. I mean, keep in mind the tax credit equity is $3.5 million. And so that's the benefit to Shorewood. You're going to win $3.5 million effectively. And but for that, this project would not be feasible. What the village is doing is just filling the gap between what the project costs, what we can get in equity, and what we can get in debt. And the reason you can't get a lot of debt on these properties is because the net operating income doesn't support it. And so you're really, that's how it stacks up, and that's the only way it's possible.
Okay. Any other discussion? I'm sorry, we've moved on to, we're voting now. Any other discussion amongst CDA? No? All right. Why don't we should we do a roll call, or are we good?
We typically do a voice vote unless we need
Okay.
clarification. So
So let's just,
make sure I listen.
so we are, just to remind everyone, the motion was to move to recommend the phase one application to the village board but for the use of TID funds for affordable housing. the development would not be created, and the following public benefits will be provided: that of affordable housing. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Any opposed?
Any opposed? Sorry.
6-0.
All right. Thank you. I think that's it, right?
A motion to adjourn would be.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.